2021 is coming to an end soon. And this is the time when we start planning for the future, for next year, our strategies. And of course, once at it, we always have to look at the current day and see the factors that influence the future, the factors that impact our strategy for the next year and beyond. In 2021, one of the such factors was undoubtedly grey listing, downgrading of Malta to a grey list of FATF. This has been quite disappointing, to say the least. But now that we've been living under this grey cloud for quite a few months, can we see and try to examine the impacts of the grey listing? Has it been impacting us? Have we have any operational day-to-day impacts? And will they perceive in the future? Enrico, you represent quite a number of operators in iGEN. How have you been seeing the impact, day-to-day operational impact of grey listing on the operators?
So good morning. Thanks, Olga. And yeah, the grey listing, as you mentioned, has been a disappointing and a negative development for Malta. The practical impacts and consequences for the gaming industry have been around the movement of money in and out of the country. So primarily, whether it's payment, these need to be justified. So there is more paperwork, there is more invoices that need to be shown to the banks, to the financial institutions. Or also when it comes to investment, so getting money to invest and drive companies into Malta, this is also has an enhanced due diligence, so there is more scrutiny. What has not changed is that if you bank within Malta, then there has been no impact. So if a Maltese company is banking within Malta, there has been essentially no change.
Right. Henric, do you think this impact, even though not significant, will continue into far future? Will there be any permanent impact of grey listing?
Good morning. Good question. I think for us as a relatively small operator, today handling the grey listing means we work with multiple banks instead of previously just one. Other than that, it works. Long term, what could happen? I don't know. I do my best to follow, the discussion and to see and try to anticipate so that we can adapt. My gut feeling is that Malta will come out of the grey listing fairly soon. I think the government seems very, very committed to it. Long term, we'll probably be one of the more compliant jurisdictions then, and hopefully we can reap some benefits of that, at least for us who've sort of managed to survive through it then.
Right. Carl, we will come out of this, right? We all hope. But how soon is soon? And what MGA and government and the country is doing in order to get us out of this grey cloud as soon as possible?
So obviously it is #1 priority for all the institutions that are involved to, depending on their involvement, either mitigate the negative impacts of grey listing in the short term, or work very, very, very hard to make sure that we get out as soon as is reasonably possible. In terms of timeframes, which is always inevitably the elephant in the room, the reason why there can be no firm commitment is because it is naturally dependent on someone else, i.e. FATF and its SSAs. But it is no secret, I think, that given the priority that we are giving it, and given the fact that there are only 2 recommendations pending on FATF side, our ambition as a country is to emulate the best that there was in terms of how quickly to get out. And I think everyone around the room knows that was Iceland in a year. So the ambition is there.
Right. So we are hopeful it will happen as soon as possible. But I guess for the next year at least, we will still definitely be in the same situation as we are today. So grey listing has been an aggravation, so to speak, of our situation. It makes it even more important that Malta as a country for the industry remains competitive, is and remains competitive. So I would like to ask the operators, what are the main pains that you experience today and you think you will continue experiencing next year in being in Malta? Pontus, your company has been here for a very long time. I remember back in 2005, we together were filling in the questionnaire for application for the first license. A lot of things have changed, of course, but what are the pains that your multinational listed company experiences through being based here?
Yeah, we have been based here for a very long time, and obviously we have established pretty well here. We have all our operations more or less taking place out of Malta. When we came here, it was because of favorable gaming regulations. And today it's a different situation because we have close to 20 local licenses and only a smaller part of our revenues coming through the Maltese license. Then again, we have built up an organization. We are well established. So for us, it's not a question. We are still remaining here, and we will remain here for the foreseeable future.
All right. Henric, you represent a mid-tier and privately owned operator. Is it the same position for you in terms of the pains that you have here, in terms of what would you like to improve? What do we all have to do in order to improve the situation? Because I'm sure mid-tier operators don't have the same muscle as the larger ones.
Unfortunately, we don't have the same budgets, no. I think for us, the biggest challenge operating here in Malta is finding tech talent. The local scene is quite small, obviously. There is high competition among operators. Some savvy individuals, I mean, developers themselves, they jump from one company to another and obviously drive up salary levels. So I would say the average cost of a developer today versus, say, 5 years ago is probably 50% higher. So the cost of tech and the access to tech talent is a big challenge for us. With COVID, obviously, people start working more remotely, and I think more companies will start recruiting developers remotely going forward than we have in the past. And then bigger companies perhaps establish, a second or a third office somewhere in Spain or in London or what have you, to access more talent. As a small company, we can't do that. We don't have that budget. So for us, we would really like to see more technology skill, both quantity and quality, coming out of Maltese education systems.
Chris, Henric mentioned technology. As a provider to the industry, what pains do you experience these days that persist with your business?
So as a technology provider, obviously, we have, as BMIT, been serving the industry since its inception in Malta. And over the years, we have evolved and grown and tried to adapt to different requirements coming out from the industry, even particularly as a result of regulatory developments in Europe. And we have always strived to ensure that we have the right capacity, whether it is co-location, whether it is connectivity, whether it is cloud compute, resources and expertise, so that our customers can choose that capacity whenever they need it, wherever they need it. Now, obviously, for you to be able to do that, you need to have scale. And one of the issues we have as a provider of such services is that you need to continuously invest to be able to supply that sort of service to our customers. With the grey listing, obviously, there is a potential that the industry may be impacted with some operators not looking at Malta as being so attractive for them in the future, maybe, to continue operating in or from here. And that might cause a problem for someone like us, where we need security of supply of demand so that we can continue to invest. So what we are hoping is that, government will really look at what it needs to do to fix the few challenges it has, maybe with more vigor, So that basically we get out of the listing in the least time possible.
Right, so there are some other challenges that we see in addition to grey listing. Carl, what does the MGA do, and maybe why does the government do, or should do, and will do, in order to ease these problems? We heard about the cost and regulatory cost and the talent issues, at least. What can be done about this to ease the pain?
Look, I think if there's a tiny silver lining out of grey listing, it's that it contextualizes these other challenges as well. And it highlights them, and it draws both our and governments in general attention to the fact that we cannot rest on our laurels, but we have to always continue to make sure that we keep improving whenever we see something which is lacking in competitiveness. As MGA, we are a rather particular type of regulator, so we also have, in terms of the law, a responsibility to advise government on the sustainability of the industry in Malta. And that is where issues like talent, for example, that Henric mentioned, that is very clearly an issue of sustainability. And there are things that can be done. I mean, some initiatives have already taken place in terms of academic courses being sponsored, being tailored specifically for an easier introduction of the workforce into the industry, but also things like looking at the highly qualified person scheme, because we know that as good as our academic throughput can become, it will still not be enough to satisfy the needs of this industry and others, because frankly, well, every industry is becoming more tech-focused now. So we always have to keep being attractive to foreign talent, and things like highly qualified persons, other assistance in terms of reducing bureaucracy in order for third country nationals to come to Malta, for example. These are things that we will be advising government on, and I think there will be a bigger will even than usual in order to make sure that these things get done and our competitiveness as a place of establishment is retained.
Right. A part of remaining competitive going forward is not just addressing the current challenges that we have, but also foreseeing the future challenges that can materialize and in the future from all different directions internationally, and addressing them and preparing to be addressed for them. And there are quite a few challenges I see coming our way. If I can single out one, it would be the OECD brokered international agreement on the 15% minimum tax on corporations, on multinationals, to be imposed across the jurisdictions. So far, it's been proposed for high revenue multinationals, but it's most probably it will go lower and lower. So is it something that the government is looking into? Is it something that we as a country preparing? And what kind of impact such a measure will have on Malta?
Well, government, as everyone is, I think, are aware that the corporate tax rate is one of the pillars of Malta's competitiveness as a place of establishment for foreign investors. In that light, this is something that is obviously spearheaded by the Ministry for Finance in Malta, but each and every sectoral regulator is contributing in terms of impact assessments, in terms of giving feedback. As with everything, and in tax even more so, the devil is in the detail. So Malta's tactic is to intervene more concretely when some more detail is out. I'll give a pretty stupid example. Our tax rate is 35%. It's with the 6/7 refund that it's ultimately down to 5 or a bit less if you count NID. So if that were to be allowed in the detail, then we would lose none of our competitiveness. Now, I don't imagine that there will be such a glaring loophole if all these countries are trying to come together to get a minimum baseline, at least for big conglomerates. But in any case, there will be detail to look into, and Malta's tactic is to intervene in that detail, be it in terms of arguing for a combination of higher thresholds, certain exclusions for certain industries, certain exclusions based on things like substance, for example. These are things that have to be discussed, but it is something that everyone is currently on the ball on.
Right. it never fails to impress me that all regulators seems to say that their goals are the same, essentially. But if you look into the details, the road that all these regulators want the industry operators to walk through is kind of different. And the more you zoom into the detail, the more differences you see. And since it is an international issue in the sense that multi-licensed operators have to operate under different licenses these days, I think it's only logical to see if something can be done on international level in order to ease this particular pain. Pontus, you would remember for sure how we fought and miserably lost the battle for EU harmonization of regulation of gaming. I think that's pretty much dead and it's been for a while. But if it is dead, but the reality is that you and other operators have still to struggle with the complexity of international regimes. Is there something else we can do in order to solve or at least ease the situation, in order to, if not harmonize, but at least streamline a little bit the compliance complexities and therefore costs? What is your view on this?
Yeah, it's a very big difference to operate under one license, as we did 15 years ago, and following one set of regulations. And today we are following close to 20 regulations, and unfortunately, none of them are very similar. So that's a lot of complexity. On the other hand, the gaming industry has always been an industry where EU has said, we are not going to harmonize, we're going to let this industry for the countries to develop the regulations themselves. So then it comes down to the countries. What can they do together to connect, to try to harmonize, to ease it up for the companies? And we haven't seen too much willingness. So I think we as an industry will have to hope that certain regulators can impact each other through organizations like GREF and where all these regulators meet up. And hopefully we can see if you can get some traction there.
Carl, how can you respond to this? Do you do enough in order to ease this particular pain from an international perspective?
It's never enough. The sooner all regulators together realize that sometimes when I speak and I say I want my licensees to be profitable, it's almost as though you're swearing sometimes, and it's the wrong approach. Because if licensed operators aren't profitable, then the black market is. And that's precisely where you don't protect players. And this is something that, I mean, our international affairs team works very, very hard to build bridges both bilaterally with other regulators, with existing regulators in Europe, and upcoming regulators even beyond Europe. Because as Pontus said, at least we can try and influence each other in that way. And we have also, despite the difficulties surrounding it, it's not like we've given up on doing something in Europe either. We are very active in GREF, and there are other regulators that are very active in GREF. We have just tried to reignite the expert group on gambling services within the Commission, because we feel that having a forum within the Commission is also a very productive way of ensuring at least some shape of further cooperation between EU regulators. And we are also very active in a current initiative for voluntary standards, which is being discussed at Senelec level for reporting standards, including on responsible gaming, in the hope that something like a voluntary standard can eventually pave the way, if adopted by enough regulators, for some sort of harmonization. The easier we can make it for good actors, operators that want to be compliant, that want to protect players, that want to achieve the objectives that we all say we have as regulators, I think the sooner we will manage to truly achieve the objective of protecting the players.
Sure.
I just want to add on there, because I feel that regulators, they tend to talk a lot about the players that are acting within the local regulation. The other part, which is quite a big part, especially if you look at revenues, they tend to forget about. They don't want to touch it. They don't even want to recognize it. If they did recognize that, then they should start to think more about channelization if you have an ambition to protect the players. So I think we as an industry and friendly regulators like Malta, we have to educate the politicians to think about not only the people who are covered by the regulations and put more restrictions on us. You should think about the full population and especially the people who are acting outside the regulation. If you do that, then the direction of the regulators acting will take a totally new course.
Right. Well, so we hope that it will become better in the future, but the stark reality of today is that there is still local licenses, and pretty much every country in Europe either has a licensing regime or about to implement one. So every time an operator who is based in Malta gets a new license in Europe, for example, there is a chip off of a part of the operation under the Malta license and transfer of that part under the new license. Carl, are you bothered that the GGR under the Malta license are going down and the value seems to be diminishing?
Yeah, obviously, it was easier when everything was under the Malta license. But the way that we look at the license is not just in terms of market access. That is obviously a very important part of it. And that is why we are constantly working to make sure that, again, we build bridges even with upcoming regulators outside of Europe, and to make sure, continuously review the restrictions that we have in place to make sure that we aren't unnecessarily prescriptive and we allow market access where that is possible with the Malta license. But we also look beyond that. So to me, the value of the Malta license going forward also lies in the kind of example that it can set. I mean, Pontus said, friendly regulators. We are very much pulling the same rope as our licensees in terms of what we want to achieve. So I see the Malta license also in the future as, if we can manage to achieve the much desired balance between regulation that is robust enough to always safeguard the country's reputation and to always make sure that we have good actors within the industry, but at the same time flexible enough for, again, the good actors to make money from what is ultimately a business, then that kind of standard, that kind of example can pave the way for better cooperation with upcoming jurisdictions. Obviously, the best case scenario would be recognition of the Malta license, but even if not that, the fact that we can ease access into these markets gives value to being established in Malta and to having the badge of being regulated by the MGA.
Enrico, what do you think the development of the value of the Malta license, and is the license the only reason why operators come and, even more importantly, stay here?
I think in Malta we have a fantastic ecosystem now. There is a critical mass of competencies, of staff, of skills, and of course the gaming industry still needs more staff, more competencies. There's probably around 1,000 open vacancies across all the companies, and I'm very optimistic for the future. I think that between the regulator and the government, they will fix the grey listing, and Malta will become a very, very clean jurisdiction, probably the most clean jurisdiction, where publicly listed companies and private companies will be really proud to be based.
Right, so our time is up. Pontus already said that Betsson is staying here. Henric, what about your company?
We're staying.
Okay, well, I know Carl is staying here for sure. Thank you very much. Thanks to my panelists for insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.